British envoy Captain Michael Sim observed in 1759 that the military of the Burmese kingdom was like that of the states of medieval Europe, where the only permanent soldiers were the king's royal household guards. The rest of the army was made up of levy troops raised from conscription. While all the various Burmese kingdoms have similar arrangements throughout history, in the Burma-speaking realms, under the Taungoo and later Koenig dynasties, the service was called Ahmudan, or literally civil service. Under the Ahmudan system, all settlements and vassals were required to raise a certain quota of men for royal service. In general, there are two distinct types of troops under the Ahmudan system. The first belonged to the part-time standing forces from the settlements directly under royal authority and the personal forces of princes and closely allied tribes who have answered their feudal obligations. The second and most well-known troops were the numerous field levies that make up the bulk of the army. Most villages around the capital and the crownlands were created based on a specific skill set, such as sailing, hunting, or riding, and some of these settlements revolved specifically around military skills. In central Burma of the Taungoo and Koenig period, Muslim and European settlements traditionally supplied artillery and musketeers, Burma and Maitrii villages as cavalrymen, while the Chin and Kachin settlements as scouts and archers. Similar arrangements exist in the Rakhine Marau and the Monhanthawadi kingdom. In addition, royal princes and governors would bring in their own retainers and personal guards during their services, and in some cases even form their own regiments. They were considered to be the best troops beside the palace guards and were the guards' main source of recruitment. However, except during wartime, their numbers were generally kept to a minimum. Southeast Asian states frequently suffered uprisings from royal relatives and powerful nobles. When left unchecked, these nobles and princes can be powerful enough to all but take over the palace, with their retainers replacing the existing royal guards. As a result, the ruling family generally were determined to keep their personal guards as the only true power in the kingdom and frowned upon any other rival forces. Should these regiments become too big or too powerful, particularly those that might belong to a royal claimant, they would either be dissolved or forced to reduce their strength. An infamous incident took place during the waning days of the Taungoo dynasty under the reign of King Mahadamayasa, where the governor of Ava, Myint-U, alarmed the crown by raising a private regiment of 1,000 men. His intentions were unknown, although there is no evidence to suggest it was treachery, as Governor Pu already had sway over most of the kingdom by controlling all the strategic posts. Regardless, his rivals at court convinced the king of treachery through this private army and was executed as a result. The main role of these regiments were to support as well as check the balance on the royal guard. They served as garrisons, enforcing royal authority, and were the first line of defense. In the Koenig period, there were a total of 41 of these regiments. Similar to the royal guard, many of these regiments were raised along ethnic lines. Ethnic Maitrii villages formed the elite Kathamian of light cavalrymen. The prominence of these non-native troops was done for security, as these men were more reliant on the palace and were unlikely to join any local revolt. Others were more localized, such as the Alone Guard or the Shuiyanang Cavalry Regiment. These Ahmudan troops were the closest thing the kingdoms had to a royal army. The part-time nature of these troops made them close to the local population and were seen more as citizen soldiers compared to the elite palace guards. These semi-regular Ahmudan troops have also played a key role in history. The Ahmudan, Burma and Maitrii cavalry and European musketeers have played a key role in the Sino-Burmese War during the Fourth Qing invasion, where they kept the Chinese forces contained within their fortresses. Because they were somewhere between the full-time palace guards and the wartime field conscripts that dominated Southeast Asian military history, they were often lumped together to either extreme in popular culture. Their status as part-time soldiers make them more popular in the Burmese imagination as the People's Army as opposed to the King's Royal Guard. The part-time nature of these troops, however, make them vulnerable between long periods of peace, as their training and equipment are inferior to the Royal Guard but do not have the numbers of the field levies. Their role is nevertheless the most important of all the branches in the military, as they were the main face of royal authority, and their presence clearly indicate the level of influence the palace has. As a result of colonial and junta propaganda, there is a notion that the pre-colonial Burmese armies were generally homogeneous, like the modern-day Tamara. However, in reality, they've always been multi-ethnic and multi-religious. Such history unfortunately is not available to the general public, and it is particularly frustrating for many ethnic minorities in how their role in their own history has been relegated to post-independent Burma. Such facts should not only be remembered, but even celebrated. The second type and most common Ahmudan troops were the wartime levies. Similar to the British provincial regimental system, these men are palace-funded troops that were expected to serve for the duration of that particular conflict, and were disbanded afterwards. Local leaders had to supply a predetermined quota of men from their jurisdiction. The selection of conscript soldiers were left to the local leaders. Conscripts could also provide a substitute or pay a fee to get out of service. The rural settlements would respond to their local lord, who in turn would respond to the royal governor. The quality of these troops varies greatly. Some settlements have strong military traditions, such as the 1,000-strong Sagaing Cavalry Regiment, who made up of 9 villages, each forming a squadron of around 100 men. These troops would generally gather at a designated point, usually the capital city itself, where it would be organized and equipped. The compound field formations were described in the Royal Orders of Burma by Aung-Thwin. From the order, we can see the type of men that were expected to be recruited, the equipment that would be given, as well as how they would be organized. Traditionally, the Burmese squad is called the Oza, named after the single pot of rice that were to be shared among the 5 men. 2 Oza or 10 men would be led by an Achat or a sergeant. 5 sergeants would be under a Tui Tauji or the head bloodsworn. 2 of these head bloodsworns would be under a Yetamu or a captain of 100, and 5 captains would be under a Bo or a colonel. With the exception of those strong with military tradition, the vast majority of the conscripts were considered highly unreliable. The reason is because the further the settlements were from the capital, the less influence they had. Many of such settlements were all but independent. As such, desertion rates were extremely high, particularly for long-distance campaigns. Thus, conscript regiments often had to be fought alongside royal guards or the part-time regiments on the battlefield, just to keep them from fleeing. Once the royal guard or the part-time troops are defeated, however, the conscripts would generally fade away, and the whole army would disintegrate. And we could see this in the First Anglo-Burmese War. The British have constantly mentioned conscripts being routed from the field and unable to withstand even a charge by a small number of British troops. Furthermore, since the conscripts were not paid, they became notorious for living off the land just to survive, living as bandits. The royal courts also generally did not make much attempt to improve their military efficiency, as local loyalties were generally stronger further away from the settlements, and an upstart noble could easily become a threat to the crown. In times of strife, rebellions from such regions were common, and it is only the field superiority of the royal troop that would keep the survival of the kingdom. Nevertheless, it was the peasant conscript, not the elite palace troops, that often did the bulk of the fighting. Under the right commanders, these peasants have defeated better trained armies in Burmese history. Compared to the rigid royal guards and even the part-time regiments, the conscripts were highly flexible and easily adaptable. While generally unreliable in foreign expeditions, nor were they expected to hold their ground against determined attacks, these peasant levies, under the right commanders, could transform into dangerous guerrilla bands. Against foreign invasions, their familiarity with the land and their village-style warfare was particularly effective against foreign expeditions. The Myint-U and the Compound Kingdoms used a system of interconnected fortresses and stockades to great effect against the Mughals of India and the Qing of China, where Burma and Rakhine conscripts would use their familiarity with the land to maneuver around the better armed and better trained Chinese and Indian troops, then trap them by building networks of temporary stockades all over their camps and supply bases. Indeed, colonial British accounts concluded that the Burmese in general made excellent military engineers. Because of this, it is the peasant soldier that represent the warrior spirit in the Burmese imagination. At their peak of their military prowess, the guardsmen could be seen as tools of tyranny, and the knights on war elephants and horses a symbol of imperialism. When the Myanmar resistant forces marched to the defense of democracy, their military heritage comes not from the shiny royal guards or the thundering war elephants and horses, but the simple village soldiers who fought only to protect their people. If you like videos like this, please press the subscribe button. See you around.